Hello, you guys, and welcome to my week 5 picks and thoughts on each game. I'm going to try to make this a bit briefer. I think we kind of know what these teams are, at this point, and I'm going to make this kind of as clear cut as I can think of it. But we're obviously going to start off with tomorrow's game being Thursday night, where the Niners visit division rival Rams in SoFi Stadium. Obviously, the Niners, Nick Bosa has now been out, quite a bit. The Niners, suffered a loss finally last weekend. And, looking at this game, I wholeheartedly believe that, the Rams are going to win. I think that Puka's playing better than any wide receiver in the league. And even if he does have sort of a slum game, I personally think that, the addition of Davante Adams is going to very much propel this team so that they don't have doldrums on offense because of the issues they had in the past where it would be Puka all day. Puka would get banged up a little bit, and Cooper Kupp was just always seemingly injured, and they wouldn't have a strong wide receiver two. And I never thought I would be saying Davante Adams is a wide receiver two, but he is a damn good wide receiver two. I also think that the running game has been very, very solid. Nothing too crazy, but they have very much complementary football. And even on the defense, I think the defense has been playing very, very well. And even though Brock Purdy doesn't have all his weapons type of thing, I think he's had, kind of an average start to the year. And obviously, this will be his second start back after his injury, having played last week and lost, to the Jaguars. And I just think that the defense of the Rams has been playing very, very, very well. So I don't see any reason why to not pick the Rams, and that is who I'm going with as 6.5 point favorites in this game at home. Moving on, we have Sunday morning, where we have the Vikings once again, and this week they play the Browns, another NFC North, division team. Unlike the Steelers, though, they don't really have an offense or weapons to be that afraid of. I think the Steelers kind of showed this last Sunday that they, were ready to play, and they were ready to kind of show and grow together and get to a point where it's at least satisfactory. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers didn't have to play that crazy of a game, having an 80-yard reception to DK Metcalf that gave him the bulk of his yardage, but they ran the football very well against the Vikings. And I do think that the Cleveland Browns, with their defense and that sort of thing, I think that Minnesota, it's going to be a tough game for them. Now, they obviously aren't starting McCarthy. McCarthy is still hurt, but I just don't have any reason to believe in Carson Wentz. I think that the Browns are obviously going to get after him quite a bit, and that's just not going to be a good thing. And obviously, yeah, JJ McCarthy, they say he's doubtful, type of thing, where it's like, I think that his, they say he could return, Sunday, but do you really want to send this guy out who's kind of banged up, isn't likely to play, and, is likely to get beat up more due to this front of the Browns that has been getting to the quarterback in a plethora of ways? So looking at this, I'm picking the Vikings to win, just because I think that they're going to be able to outscore Cleveland. And I think that, they've had a decent running game this year. But I do think that, Carson Wentz is good. They're going to have a game plan to minimize, the pass rush, and that sort of thing. So, this is kind of a toss-up game. I think it's going to be a lot closer than people think. I think that, it is the second game where Addison is back, thankfully. But hopefully the Vikings are able to kind of rally and have somewhat of a home field advantage because it is in London where the Vikings have a very good following. So I'm picking the Vikings, but I expect it to be kind of a brawl and a kind of we'll see kind of moment. Moving on, we have Raiders and Colts. The Colts suffering their first loss, last week against the Rams, and no longer being undefeated. But this week they have a pretty good rebound week against a Raiders team that just looked rough. And they looked rough against the Bears last week, which I don't think the Bears, are anything to sing home to. And I think the Colts, they're still poised to really run away with this division. Daniel Jones is looking, pretty good. And while Geno Smith is passing for a lot of yards, he now exceeds TDs, his 6 TDs with 7 interceptions, because he just, to me, I think he believes too much that he can fit the ball through any hole, and that is very, very bad. And I do think the Raiders, while they have a good defense for against the run, I just think that this will be the hardest test, of the year for them in terms of the rushing attack that they've played. Because early on, the Chargers didn't really have that good of a rushing attack. New England didn't really have that good of a rushing attack. Washington doesn't really have that. And Chicago doesn't really have a rushing attack. So the Colts are the toughest run team, that they play. Obviously, Daniel Jones does have a good amount of passing. I'm not going to take anything away from him. But last week, you did appear somewhat vulnerable throwing picks. And now having the year, he has over 1,000 passing yards, but 4 TDs to 2 interceptions. So I think that this week they do get themselves right, and the Colts win this game. Moving on, we have Giants and Saints. I really don't think anyone thought that Jaxson Dart was really going to come in and play as well as he did, and especially with Malik Neighbors going out. It really sucks because he kind of proved he didn't need Neighbors. And while it wasn't the most pretty game, it just, says, I think, a lot about your character that you lose your best receiver and, potentially the best, wide receiver, young wide receiver in the league, or that came into the league last year in the draft, and it just kind of shows. And I think that, going into this week, I think that Brian Burns, Bobby Okereke are going to do wonders, against this team. And they're just not going to let them really have, a chance type of thing. I think that Cam Skattebo has been doing very, very well and has a bruiser mentality. And I just think that it's going to really, really help. It's going to really, really help, considering, obviously Tyrone Tracy is still injured with that shoulder injury. And, Chase Young, I'm pretty sure, missed last week. He's still questionable and has a calf injury. I just feel like anytime you have a calf injury and you're not able to power through as a pass rusher, it's going to really limit your ability to do, pass rusher things. The calf that they have to pivot on, they have to be able to power through. And, Jaxson Dart's mobility, I think it's kind of strange that the Giants are 1.5 point underdogs in this game. They are visiting New Orleans, and this is definitely a game that I feel like New Orleans could potentially steal. But I just think that the defense of the Giants is far too good that if they were able to give Herbert headaches, they're going to be able to give Spencer Rattler headaches. So I am going with the Giants in this one. And now we move on to Cowboys-Jets. The Jets, to me, are a team that clearly, they just have too many inconsistencies on their offense. I don't mind their rushing game, and that's their rushing game at all, but it hasn't exactly been, anything crazy. I like how Justin Fields is able to get away and be able to rush and that sort of thing and do things with his legs, but overall it doesn't come often enough. Obviously, the Dallas Cowboys have kind of proven that they can be a very efficient offense. I think that despite, me not liking Dak Prescott, I do think he's playing at a very, very high level this year. And George Pickens has really kind of started playing like a guy who wants to get paid a lot of money. And to me, it's like if the Packers pass rush last week couldn't really get to Dak that much, then how is the Jets? Where, don't get me wrong, I think Will McDonald is a hell of an athlete, but he only has 2 sacks on the year, which is less than both Micah and Rashawn Gary each, type of thing. So the Jets are really going to have to, kind of play keep away and run the ball. But like I said, they haven't been able to have crazy consistency, or you're going to have some crazy game from Garrett Wilson, which I just don't see happening. I expect the Cowboys to win this game and improve to 2-1 so that they can start pursuing, the Commanders that they don't want to fall too far behind, that have had a rough start to the season as well. So I'm picking the Dallas Cowboys to beat the Jets. Broncos and Eagles. This is in Philadelphia, so obviously, a very, very tough place to play. I do think the Broncos defense is going to give Philadelphia headaches. I think that Surtain can really trail anybody. I think that he's not going to have a problem with A.J. Brown. I think he's not only younger, has this, maybe even better length and just better technique and coverage than A.J. Brown has in receiving, that he's going to really, really limit A.J. Brown or even, Devontae Smith, which I feel like that's kind of foolish if he's on Devontae Smith, but even so, I think that Philadelphia is just going to be able to really smother and swarm the ball on this Denver offense, and Denver's not going to have it easy offensively, and this is going to be a very, very big challenge for Bo Nix. So I am picking Philadelphia to win this game, because I just don't think that Denver, who, don't get me wrong, they very well could have been 4-0 if not for like two kicks, type of thing. But I think that their offense has just kind of proven that, they're not as great as everyone thought they were going to be, and there's some growing pains. So I'm going with Philadelphia in this game to remain undefeated and get their 3rd win at home. Moving on to Dolphins and Panthers. This game to me is kind of a crapshoot. You have Carolina as 1.5-point underdogs, but then obviously the injury to Tyreek. I just think that if you're putting J.C. Horn on Waddle, that, hey, he's going to lock him up. I think that Carolina has a better defense than the Dolphins, so it's like maybe their offense can get going, but they've appeared very, very off and on this year. Obviously, the Panthers last week, they only put up 13, but the week before they put up 30. The week before that, 22, which is incredibly modest. And then the week before that, 10 points. So they've been up, down, where it's like you only had 2 consistent. So is this one of those games where they can, do very, very well? Now, I think that they do have, to me, kind of a defense that's not going to fall victim to Darren Waller, but it's just kind of, to me, it's kind of one of these things that, like, is Carolina going to show up today? And it's like, who do I pick? I'm going to pick Carolina because I think they're at home. I think that Miami is just too inconsistent. And I think that Carolina, I think that when they lose one of these wide receivers, the other just kind of seemingly struggles because they don't have these 2 blazers. And I think that Carolina just has the better defense to, be able to like contain and, make sure that, hey, these guys aren't going to have anything easy and they're going to tackle well, which I don't see from the Dolphins, if I'm being honest with you. So yeah, I'm picking Carolina in kind of a who knows kind of game, and we move on to Texans and Ravens. this is probably the biggest, like, oh, these two teams at this point, they're losers. They're not doing well. And you fall to 1-4, and it's kind of like, goodness gracious me, we have 12 games left in the season, and you have very crazy low margin for error, especially in a stacked AFC conference where you already have a couple of teams that are overperforming type of thing that weren't expected. So it's looking very bleak if Baltimore drops this game, because at this point they're tied with Cleveland. They are a win behind Cincinnati, who hasn't looked good, and then Pittsburgh seemingly looks like they could potentially run away with the division. But Lamar Jackson with a hammy, that's not good to me. Or maybe it is. I feel like he has been trying to scramble too much this year. But then again, then you're playing the Houston Texans, who still have a very good defense, but the offense is scuffed, because their O-line is just so bad, type of thing. And you played the Lions and they were able to run at will over you. Maybe this is a resurgence game for Nick Chubb, who had a lackluster season. Who has the better team? And Roquan Smith being doubtful for this game, like, that just isn't good with a hamstring injury. Lamar Jackson's even doubtful, but is Cooper Rush going to be able to come in and provide a spark? He usually did when he was on the Cowboys. But then again, on the Cowboys, you have guys like CeeDee Lamb. The Ravens do not have a wide receiver as good as CeeDee Lamb, as big of a game changer. So do we figure out that, hey, Cooper Rush just had a top 5 wide receiver and that he really doesn't do much if he doesn't have a top talent type of thing? So it's like, this game, is a crazy must win for each. I predict that the team that loses, probably misses the playoffs more than likely, but I am gonna say I think the Ravens win this game. I think they find a way to win, and they defend home this time, unlike against when they played the Lions, and they got dominated. But I'm picking the Ravens, and good luck at both of these teams. Titans, Cardinals. The Cardinals, as we all know, had a game where they did not play as well as they could. And it's interesting because, I thought that Tennessee would kind of be coming around and they would start off 0-4. Obviously not having the easiest schedule, in the world, where it's like the last game they played was Houston, and Houston just dominated them. Indy dominated them. The Rams and Denver, definitely not the easiest first 4-game start, but when you play Houston and Houston's able to score a good amount on you, and what I thought was supposed to be a strength of this team was the defense, it's just not a good look to me. So it's like, I don't really have much confidence in Tennessee. It seems like Cam Ward is very, very struggling, and Arizona Cardinals have a very good chance to, get above 500 in week 5 and rise to 3-2 in a division where nobody has a losing record. And all the other teams go into this week with 3 wins, which is nuts. It looks like the NFC North from last year somewhat, but I'm picking the Cardinals, obviously, because I can't imagine Tennessee just does a complete 180 and can compete with a team that, like the Cardinals, who has been stout up to this point. Buccaneers, Seattle. Definitely a game to watch. Seeding implications potentially with how close these teams are right now. I like the Buccaneers despite Mike Evans not playing, this week, and still battling that hamstring injury. I do think that, it's good. Chris Godwin has always come back from these injuries and been very, very, very good. And I think that, Tampa Bay is just going to show a level of consistency. And I think Baker and Igbuka just continue to get better. Now, I do think that you look at the Buccaneers as well, and I think that they're just going to be very, very savvy about being able to stop JSN, who is having a very, very good year, and I just think that you look at these guys, and I think that they have a good DB room, as well as, Antoine Winfield Jr. and Tyke Smith as their safeties. So I just overall think that they're going to be a lot more consistent of a team. And I think that, despite Sam Darnold being very, very good right now, I think that Tampa Bay realized they let one get away from them last week where they could have beat, who many people are saying are still the best team in the league, in the Eagles. And they're going to come and they're going to play tough against a Seattle Seahawks team. And I think the Seahawks have a chance to, kind of, maybe look a little bit more like they did, in previous years, where it's like they're not going to have an easy time running it against a stout run D. And, Chris Godwin, I think, is just going to really, do very, very well. Godwin, Igbuka, and then even, even Sterling Shepard, who I think has just looked very good. I just think that this is a team that they're going to come out and they're going to show their consistency, and they're going to show they have a much more consistent run game than Seattle has, who have looked good in the run game, but I need to see it multiple weeks in a row. So yeah, I'm going with the Buccaneers in this game, despite them being 3.5-point underdogs. Moving on to Lions and Bengals. I don't think this game needs much to talk about. I think the Lions are going to smoke the Bengals, and it's not going to be pretty at all. I think it's wild that Detroit only has 10.5-point favorites on this game. I just don't get it. I don't like Detroit. I think that, whatever you believe, whether you think that like their offense is back, they played Chicago, who doesn't have a good defense, and they whooped them 52-21. They played Baltimore, who was banged up, and Madubuike has been out, since that game, and is now on IR, and they're able to run all over them. And then Cleveland to me was interesting because you look at kind of the drives, where, you look at kind of the touchdown plays of, Detroit and that sort of thing. They had, in the second quarter, they had 5 plays for 16 yards where they were able to get a field goal because of a turnover, and that sort of thing. They had another one that was a touchdown where they only had to drive 5 yards type of thing, and that sort of thing. But I think last week they kind of showed that up against a great defense, which Cleveland has been, that you're not driving down the field, type of thing. So I think the jury is still out on Detroit. I think that they've beat up on these teams that have, not the greatest of defenses. And, just go and look at just look at the scoring. Like, I'm looking at it right now, you guys, and, yeah, they beat them by more, 24 points. But you look at, they only had one touchdown that was a full drive of 65 yards. And it was in the first quarter, and it was a 5-play, 65-yard drive. So it's one of those things where it's like, what do we say about, this, that it's like, hey, we're, you got some penalties to go your way, and you've got, the Browns imploding, kind of like how they did against the Ravens, because they were playing the Ravens close but imploded on offense. So Detroit, I think, will do very well against the bad defenses, but perhaps that's one reason why they're not favored as much. Is Cincinnati, even though they have a bad defense, has proved a little opportunistic this year. But I'm still taking Detroit to win this game and rise to 4-1. Moving on, we have Commanders and Chargers. The Chargers suffered a hard loss last week when I don't think they knew what to expect with the Giants and their offense. I think that Jaxson Dart kind of provided a spark, a lot more energy. And I think that goes to show a lot about him and how the team believes in him and that sort of thing. And so you think about these teams and how they have to bounce back. The Commanders are obviously kind of a struggling team at this point. You've had your Jaden Daniels has been hurt. He hasn't played the best. He is planning on playing Sunday. He's not listed on the injury report anymore. Do I think that the Chargers are really going to let him kind of escape? He is going to have to beat him through the air type of thing. They obviously played Jaxson Dart, who to me looked a little bit more athletic than Jaden Daniels, in all honesty, in his first start type of thing. I will say this, Joe Alt being doubtful because he has a high ankle sprain, that is not good, type of thing. You obviously, Mekhi Becton as well, still concussion protocol. They're theorizing that he's back type of thing, but you never know when these guys are going to clear that. Other than that, though, I think that you look at Washington, and it's, kind of one of those things that, hey, are they going to force enough pressure on Herbert? Which the Giants, they can force pressure from a lot of different areas. And I think that, going to the Charger Stadium after they've just suffered kind of a difficult loss, and don't get me wrong, you suffered a loss to Atlanta last week, which is, not a good sign. You put up a good amount of points, but you're playing a far better defense in the Chargers than Atlanta last week. And I think that they're looking to redeem themselves, and Herbert's going to get right back on track, and he's going to beat Washington. Now moving on to Sunday Night Football, which will be the last game I predict. I'm going to do a separate video for Monday night, you guys. We have Patriots visiting the Bills. The Patriots looked very, very good last week. They put up 42 points. I think that Stephon Diggs is only going to continue to gel with Drake May and develop. He does only have 213 yards through 4 games at this point, but it's off of 19 receptions. So, he's averaging a good amount per catch type of thing. Harold Landry has actually been playing very, very well for the Patriots, and Drake May has a very, very, very high completion rating, which if you look at, any crazy enough, he has more passing yards than Josh Allen going into this game, and the same number of touchdowns and, one more pick. So to me, you look at this game and it's like, can Drake May continue to play this, very high rate of play against a defense that, to me, they've looked tough. You do have Ed Oliver with an ankle injury, nothing to really be concerned about. Every team is, kind of at full strength, in the, for the most part. You have a few missing New England Patriots that are, not key guys. But I think that the Patriots really have a chance to kind of, play tough with Buffalo. And maybe because their defense is a little bit more sound than Buffalo's is, they can keep this game close. Buffalo has the advantage that it's at home, obviously. It is the 4th Buffalo Bill game at home this year, which is wild. And 4 home games in 5 weeks. They've only had to travel once. So will Stephon Diggs have a breakout against his former team where he's like, I'm going to show that I still have it, that I can still play, you never should have gotten rid of me type of situation? Or will we have just a Josh Allen dominance frenzy? I am leaning towards, I think this is going to be a close game. I think it's going to be a fun game. But I am still predicting that the Bills take this game. I don't think New England's getting the respect it deserves, in all honesty, with a 7.5 point spread. But I think that, they're only going to continue to get better and show that they're a team that can potentially, play with the top teams this year. and that's where I'm leaning towards on this game. But I do think the Bills prevail in what could be a crazy tight game on Sunday Night Football. But if you guys want to tell me what you think, I guess, but otherwise, I think that, we do have a good slew of games this week. I'm definitely looking forward to Sunday night. I think this is going to be a real fun game of division rivals. Obviously, Monday night, Monday night we have Kansas City and Jacksonville, which I think could be very interesting, especially considering that Kansas City looks kind of resurgent after last week, and don't get me wrong, they didn't play the toughest of defenses type of thing, and Jacksonville looks pretty hot right now, and maybe Jacksonville wants some revenge for all the times that Kansas City punched them out of the playoffs, but we'll see. And I mean, I'll be putting out that prediction video on maybe Friday, maybe Saturday. But on Friday, I am going to be doing a video where I predict the rest of the season, how I think it's going to play out based on the games we had. Obviously, we'll have known Thursday's results by then, so I won't be picking a team to, which one wins that game. But it'll be the rest of week 5, with these picks. And then every week afterwards to kind of show, what the playoff seeding would be if certain teams win and that sort of thing. But tell me what you guys think and whether or not you agree with the picks I made. And as always, go Pack, go.